What could go wrong with an ethical theory that says that we should do the most loving thing? Well, as it turns out, a lot. Welcome to Untangled Philosophy. Today, we're scratching our heads as we try to figure out exactly what love and situation actually means in Joseph Fletcher's situation ethics. In some places in Fletcher's book, Situation Ethics, he describes love as an attitude, giving the impression that acting from the attitude of love is what makes an action morally good. Hence, he describes the fourth proposition of his theory as love wills the neighbour's good, whether we like him or not, and begins this section by saying, to love Christianly is a matter of attitude, not of feeling. In other words, liking or disliking someone is a feeling, whereas love is an attitude that we can apply to situations regardless of how we feel about the people involved. Here, love appears to act like a virtue in an Aristotelian sense. Aristotle believed that we act morally when we act virtuously. We do this by embodying certain virtues like courage. We can act courageously in battle, for instance, regardless of our feelings towards our enemy or comrades. Meanwhile, Fletcher also speaks about love as an end that we ought to bring about. For example, when discussing the fifth proposition, love justifies the means, he says, there is only one end, one goal, one purpose which is not relative and contingent, always an end in itself. Love. He will flesh out this consequentialist strand of situation ethics by introducing the Agapeic calculus, which he readily admits is just a rejigging of the hedonic calculus of the utilitarians. Okay, I'm pronouncing this Agapeic. You could also say agape and therefore Agapeic, but Fletcher pronounces it as agape, but Agapeic sounds made up, so I've gone with Agapeic. Alright, back to the video. Instead of maximising pleasure, the Agapeic calculus has a bit of Jesus chucked in there and promotes the greatest amount of neighbour welfare for the largest number of neighbours possible. However, whereas Bentham details 7 components that we must weigh, Fletcher seemingly forgets about the Agapeic calculus just as soon as he introduces it, providing absolutely no description of its criteria or how it would be applied to situations, leaving us all wondering whether we still need to bother measuring propinquity and fecundity or not. This is made all the more confusing when we reach the sixth proposition, love decides there and then. The idea is that you can only determine what the most loving thing to do is when you find yourself in the situation. There and then only can he find out what is the right thing to do. Now, on the surface, this has a bit of an intuitionist feel, which is consistent with understanding love as an attitude. We ought not to be what Fletcher calls legalists. We cannot enter ethical decision-making armed with a moral manual on how to apply rules to the situation. Fine, instead we enter the situation and then act from an attitude of love with the intention of doing the most loving thing. Or at least that is the impression if love is to be understood as an attitude. But if the most loving thing is the result of applying the Agapeic calculus to bring about the most welfare for my neighbours, the theory shifts, or so it seems to me, from one that is more subjective, in which attitude is primary, to one that is more objective and equipped with a calculus. To this extent, we surely can reach moral conclusions without being in the situation and without doing it there and then, despite what the sixth proposition declares. In fact, Fletcher seems to do this very thing in one of the rare instances in which he actually mentions the Agapeic calculus, applying it to the platitudinous moral dilemma of who you should save from a burning building when you only have time to save one. If the choice is between your own father and a medical genius who has discovered a cure for a common fatal disease, you carry out the genius if you understand agape. This is the Agapeic calculus. A strange thing to say when you've neglected to explain exactly what the Agapeic calculus is at all. It's also interesting that a theory that purports to be about love favours you saving a stranger over your dad, but the main point here is that what Fletcher means by love is left unclear. Okay, not to worry, at least Fletcher is clear about what situation means, right? Well, no, actually Fletcher is not clear about what factors are morally relevant to the situation. Imagine you find yourself in a situation in which a terminally ill patient wants to die. Great news, you can now make a moral decision because you are in the situation. But what features of this situation are morally important and which ones are the most important. As Dimmock and Fisher write, do we consider his religious views, the fact that he has 3 cats which depend on him? What about the type of illness, the type of death, who he leaves behind, the effect it might have on the judicial system, the effect on the medical profession, etc. As they conclude, what does and does not get considered in the situation will be dependent on what we already think is important. Fletcher's moral theory doesn't tell us what we ought to think is morally important. It doesn't tell us what matters. Hypothetically, if 2 people are in the exact same situation, they may still come out with different conclusions about what the most loving thing to do is because they hold competing claims about what is morally relevant. In my favourite TV series, Lost, Jack and Saeed discuss what to do with all the dead bodies from the plane crash. Saeed, a Muslim, argues that the wishes of those who have died ought to be taken into account the best they can. Jack, who doesn't seem especially religious, retorts that they don't have time to figure out which god each person believed in. Saeed thinks that one's religious views and wishes about how they ought to be laid to rest are morally relevant to the situation. Jack doesn't. Who's right? Well, it's no good asking Joseph Fletcher because he doesn't tell us. Perhaps the best way to end this video is with this. Fletcher's situationism is a hopelessly confused and confusing moral theory. In an entire book devoted to love and situation, he doesn't consistently explain what love is or tell us what is morally relevant to the situation. What do you think about Fletcher's situation ethics? Is there any hope for a theory centered around love? Thank you for watching. See you next time.